All right. Forgot I was on mute there for a second. So, welcome everybody to the workshop put on by Time Doctor for how to avoid compliance pitfalls while working with remote teams. I'm your host. My name is Dufaulte. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer over at Time Doctor, and joining me as my co-host today, one of our lead solutions engineers, is Damien King. Damien, how you doing today, man?
Yeah, I'm good, Duan. Thank you. Great intro, and thanks everyone for joining the call. Yeah, look, like really important topic. Just to kind of tag on to that, it's important because it affects every single business of all sizes, all industries, right? Especially when it comes to remote work in the post-COVID world that we now live in live in.
Yeah.
Uh, Remote work is static. It's here to stay in some form or another, right? So, ensuring compliance is more and more challenging, right? It becomes increasingly challenging the more remote that we have. So,
Yeah.
uh, you know, with the right strategies, we can turn those challenges into opportunities, right? So, it's a really important topic.
Yeah, and just to call the elephant in the room, it's compliance could be a four-letter word, could be seen as boring, could be a lot of things, but it's kind of that the death by a thousand paper cuts where one of them finally does the deed, right? And so it's one of those
Yeah.
things where it's not a problem until it's a problem, and once it's a problem, it's usually a really big problem that you can't undo. So hopefully today we can kind of shed some light on some situations that you may be experiencing in your business and don't realize it, and now there's awareness to it that you see now that you can't unsee. So we'll get into it. But before we kind of get into a couple things, some housekeeping. We're all in a workshop. It's remote, it's video. We can see what's going on. You can see what's going on. But all mics are muted for right now, other than myself and Damien's. You can ask questions real time on the right hand side. There's a Q&A bar where you can bring questions. You can add comments. You can say things if you need to, but try to keep it in a good manner. But we'll try to answer those questions as we go. If not, we'll get to them at the end. There'll be plenty of time for that. During the presentation, as we kind of go through use cases and scenarios, there will be polls that show up. So just a prompted question that we'd love your engagement on. So that way we can kind of answer them, add some commentary, and see what's going on. They are relevant to today's conversation, so it's not just a trick. And we'll share the recording, right? So we want to make sure you have access to this. So if you're not able to join this today, so if you're on the on-demand or the replay, I appreciate you watching this. We missed you on the live version. And then, of course, lots of confidentiality. So the discussions that we have here, the questions that you bring in, we don't share outwardly. We don't use them as marketing opportunities. So we want to make sure that you can answer your question anonymously if you really need to, so we can get that answered for you. So kind of go quick agenda for today. We want to help navigate the compliance challenges in remote teams, like bring to light what are those challenges a lot of companies face and see if you've got one of those. Real world case studies and lessons learned from one of the thousands of businesses that we work with, and some of the challenges that they didn't realize they were having until they implemented a tool to cover that stuff. And then really simplifying compliance with automation, the right kind of automation. And then we'll get into the differences there. And we want to make sure that there is plenty of time for Q&A. So if you have questions, you haven't brought them up yet, that'll be an opportunity for you to bring them in. So jumping right into it though, I mentioned it before, compliance could be a four-letter word, meaning a bad word. But it's important to understand, what does compliance mean to you? So like Damien, you've been in this side for a long time. You've dealt with varying types of compliance. And where do you see the definition of compliance falling for most companies right now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And also, I'll ask the audience, feel free to pop that in the box as well, right?
Yeah.
What does compliance mean to you as a business?
Yeah.
Because it is such a broad church. It's a wide spectrum. There's all forms of compliance in terms of data, industry, country specific. But essentially, what it means is for your business to function legally, it needs to comply with specific standards that are set out, right? As I mentioned, right, they could be industry. For example, in the payment card industry, it could be PCI DSS, right? In healthcare, well, the original HIPAA was patient confidentiality, patient data compliance, right? And the jurisdictional that I mentioned, right? Each jurisdiction will have their own specific compliance standards. The one that we all know and love in the EU is GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. But we're seeing so many more of those GDPR type regulations pop up across the world. South Africa, you've got POPI. Brazil, you've got LGPD. and in India you've got PDPB, right? And in the US there's a lot more as well that are specific
Yeah.
to the state, right? You'll know, Duane, living in California, right? Like you guys, yeah,
Yeah, if you can do business in California, you can do it anywhere. And it
yeah,
almost sounds like you need a dictionary for all the different acronyms that you have
yeah,
to memorize to understand that. What's interesting though is something we were talking about before, Damien, is everyone thinks compliance is all about technology. Right? They
yeah,
see compliance, they think legal, they think all that paperwork stuff. When it comes down to it, I think like 99% of the compliance issues that we've seen have all been people related. People
yeah,
clicking on the wrong thing, people logging in, leaving their device open, not logging out. And that's when compliance becomes a risk because someone clicked on the wrong or didn't do something, didn't adhere to a process. And so
yeah,
usually like my first exposure to compliance, I was like just big legal term, regulatory, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, it's a process that your internal teams need to follow to prevent issues from happening. Is like, to put it simply, and all of those processes are summed up with those acronyms that you rifled off so well. But it comes down to people and
yeah,
awareness about what people are doing. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about like the different kind of versions or the most common issues in compliance, but then how that's connected to the team, right?
yeah,
So getting into it, thinking about the different locations, the first poll question popping up is, where's the majority of your team based, right? Working in a remote world, it's not all based in one office. You could have multiple offices, you can have a hybrid, but where's your team based? Is it North America? Is it Latin America in the Asia Pacific market? Or are you more kind of in that EU range or the Middle East and Africa, kind of that stuff? So where is the majority of your team based? Love to kind of figure out where we're talking to at this time of day.
yeah.
I don't know, it's almost lunchtime here in California. So what time is it for you, Damien?
Yeah, I'm over in Ireland here, right? So it's
Yeah.
just after 7 p.m. for me right now. So yeah, I'm in that last bracket. But as well, like while people are kind of answering that poll, why is compliance important, right? Like
Yeah.
even in the broad kind of the macro level, right? It's absolutely important for you as a business owner to maintain a trustworthy business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not just outwardly, but also internally. Make your employees feel that they work in a secure and professional environment, right? By adhering to certain compliance standards, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's on a real macro top level, compliance is something that every single business needs to adhere to and implement.
Yeah. It's whether they don't even, some companies, they don't even realize it's something they need to deal with or handle, but every company has a different level of it. It's
Yeah,
just how they identify it. How aware are they of compliance, the big C word in their business. Oh, looks like everyone's in my neck of the woods. So
yeah,
hey, welcome to the call, everybody. It's just about
yeah,
lunchtime for some of you, or you're getting done with lunch. So kind of moving forward a little bit, when we talk about the different versions of compliance, like this is where it gets really interesting. Like we're
mm,
going to say the word compliance a lot, so get used to it. Hopefully it's an annoying word by the time we're done and you don't have to deal with it. But like looking at the cost of not being compliant, looking at the cost of it, and look at the implication of the business. And there are some wildly large numbers that get thrown out there. And so, Damien, if you could elaborate on some of these things, when we look at 14.8 million in the
yeah,
cost of non-compliance, like where does that cost come from?
yeah. No, it's a great question. And that 14.82 million is a big figure, right? And this is from a study that was conducted in 2020 by the Ponemon Institute, right? So they conducted a previous study back in 2011, right? And this is the average cost of non-compliance to, I think it was almost 60 companies that they surveyed. And just, to give you an idea about those companies, they were wide spectrum in terms of industries
Mm-hmm.
and in terms of business sizes, right? So they're not only picking your large Fortune 500 companies, right? So it's across the board. By the way, that previous study that they did in 2011, this 14.82 million represents a 45% increase on that. So you can
Wow.
see the direction of travel, right? It's only
Yeah.
going in this direction.
Like taxes, they only go up.
Yeah, exactly. But also, the counter to that figure, right, is what's the cost of compliance? What is the cost for a business to remain compliant, right?
Hmm.
And it's basically a third of that, right? It's 5.47 million, right? So it really highlights the fact that non-compliance is staggeringly more expensive than remaining in compliance by deploying all of the strategies that we know, and we can go into a little bit later to remain compliant as a business. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting stat. And so with the cost, is that from fees? Is that from
Yeah.
lost? Like where does when we think about the 14.82 million, like what goes into that? Is that a check a business has to write? Is it extra taxes, or like what actually makes that fee up?
So there's quite a lot involved within this cost, right? So in terms of you've got a lot of data security, forensics and monitoring, overall enforcement. If there are any potential fines, infringements, lawsuits that have been brought in relation to non-compliance, these are all factored in the overall cost of that 14.82 million. So, again, it can affect a business in many different ways, and as you can see from that figure, it can be potentially business ending, right? You know what I mean? That's bigger, depending on the size of your business. So
that's pretty crazy. Like if you're a small to medium sized business and you have one compliance breakdown, it could potentially end your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only that, but even if it's not business ending, the potential cost to your reputation can be really hard to come back from. You've kind of already touched on it, but it's pretty tough to put the genie back in the bottle. You know what I mean? From a reputational standpoint. And if there's a large breach, for example, or your operations have to cease for X amount of time, again, not only is that going to have an initial financial impact, but it will have a knock-on reputational effect as time goes on as well.
Yeah, I mean, we all know, some banking institutions that's been in the news the last couple of months around some, let's call it breaching compliance when it comes to things that their employees were doing. And that's just tarnished their reputation. I mean, they've done other things, but that one was like a really big hit on their reputation. I've even worked with companies like Garmin that, they had a compliance issue where they got hacked and they got held to ransom, and I couldn't access any of my Garmin information for a couple of weeks. Like, it was pretty crazy. And, even then it's like any time now that the app loads extra slow, I get concerned because that happens. So the reputation and reliability, I use it much less than I did before. And there's a lot of things that happen that we don't really think about, like going back and looking at the manager's suspicion of violations in their team. Like, there's so much baked into this one that we don't really pay attention to, or we're just not aware of how we're managing employees based on our compliance and our policy adherence. We just think, hey, we got a policy in place, we're good, but then we're not training our managers. They don't know what to look for. They don't know how to spot that. And then all of a sudden something happens and business could be shut down. Operations are slowed down. Like, there's so much that happens after you implement a policy that you then have to manage to that people just don't do. So we'll get into a couple of those things. And that's just one thing that always sticks out to me. It's like we do things, we implement policies, procedure, whatever, but then we don't do anything with it. We don't have a way to monitor the adherence to that to even prevent potential issues with compliance. So jumping into it though, second poll question, right? So like I said, there's a couple poll questions. I'll set up each topic ahead of time. So the second poll question we've got for everyone to answer is, what kind of tools do you think exist for faking work?
Yeah.
We got mouse jigglers. We got mouse clickers. We got keystroke script, or we can call it keystroke scripters. We keep with the fun play on words, and then all the above. Like, I'd love to hear from the group. The poll should be up on your screen.
Yeah.
Which kind of tools do you think exist for faking work?
Yeah, and little bit of a cheat code here, right? Like, while people are answering that, I'm just going to pop this up right up here, okay?
Yeah.
And I promise I purchased this with permission, okay? I'm not using. This is the very top one. This is what we call a mouse jiggler, right? You can purchase this. I purchased this from Amazon for $10. Okay, these things are everywhere. Okay, and in a remote environment, this is a plug and play device. Literally goes in here straight into the USB. Can be completely undetected, right? You just sit your mouse on top of this right here, and what it's going to do is it's going to imitate mouse movement. It will move my mouse for me, and what that's going to do is it's going to imitate me working like I'm at my station, right? What I can do as a remote worker, I can leave this room, go off, play golf, shoot 18, do whatever I want to, and it will look like I'm working. Right? This is the scary part about it, because it's so hard to detect behaviors like that or that type of spurious activity, and we have a solution for that with time. Yeah.
It's interesting just because when you think about compliance, you don't think about that. But it's like
Yeah.
if your workstation is left open and you're in a co-working state and you're in a co-working environment, right? Like what happens, right? So good.
Yeah.
Everyone caught on is all of the above. So that's
Yeah.
good. Yeah, all three of those things have been created to allow people to fake work. And the crazy part is very few pieces of technology out there, very few companies offer a solution that can detect all three of them. Right.
Yeah.
And so we'll get into some examples of where we have helped companies detect one of, if not all three, inside of their organization. And so
Yeah.
one of the first examples that we've got is one of the thousands of companies we worked with, one of the insurance companies. They ended up catching their employees using fake working tools that we just showed you. And so I'll let Damien kind of break it down a little bit, but the amount of work that was being detected by these fake work tools was just alarming to see this well-established insurance company being a victim of these types of tools. Like, so I'll let you break it down though.
Yeah, and you know, it proved to be more of a wide ranging issue than just that as well. Like that was one of the major things that they saw. And just to add on to that previous bit that we were talking about, from a compliance standpoint, using things like these and leaving my workstation totally open. To your point, if you're working in a shared environment, or even if you're not, if you're working anywhere you're working from, if you're working from home even, and you're leaving your workstation open, any sensitive client information that I have open on my screen is
Yeah.
immediately at risk of being taken, and then that could potentially start a compliance breach or an infringement. You know, in this specific case, Duane, right? This was a U.S. health insurance provider that we have it, right? This client, they came to us initially. They had no real visibility over what their remote workers were doing. Right, they were essentially blind to what was happening. They had some kind of basic methods, but they were kind of concerned as to whether some of their employees were maybe trying to game the system, whether they were actually doing their 8 hours a day, right? Like even that kind of base level concern, real level one stuff.
Yeah.
And so when they came to us, they were kind of flying blind, right? And they had no real way of knowing for sure, right? They were actually putting a lot of time and effort into trying to detect it themselves, like trawling through their own data points internally to try and find the answers. Spending a huge amount of time, like such a time suck for managers to try and have to go and figure out whether your employees are doing even the basics. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So obviously, a knock-on effect from this, from their agents that they had, was huge productivity impact on the business. Right, employees were missing potentially 4 or 5 days or 4 or 5 hours throughout the day. Okay, what that meant was you got other employees who were picking up the slack. Right, so you got an uneven balance across your team. So you
Yeah.
got people who are overworked and then people who are underworked, and then also that in turn affected their end result, right? Their CSAT scores.
Yeah.
What people were saying about them, right? Those CSAT scores they actually built up and they were really proud of over the previous few years. They had just seen them constantly decline over time, right?
Yeah. And
But,
I'm sure there's hours being logged. There's 8 hours every day. And
yeah,
when productivity goes down, outcome goes down, but the 8 hours are there. It's like, where do you look to really understand like how that's working? And so I'd love to break, like, what was the outcome for them? Like when they implemented a solution, like what was done and, how are they doing today?
Yeah. So what we did was we kind of sat down with them. We discussed their specific examples, their use cases, and we really kind of like held our hand through that initial kind of discovery process. And then what we came up with was a plan to implement Time Doctor as a solution for a trial. Right. Let's try this for 14 days, maybe 21 days. I think it ended up being in the end, just to figure out exactly what was going on. Because as I said, they had zero visibility. What we were able to do with Time Doctor was we were able to detect everything that their users were doing in terms of how much they were interacting with the mouse, the keyboard, what websites they were visiting, what apps they were using, whether they were being productive or unproductive, the amount of idle time, a huge amount of data that we were able to share, and it really opened their eyes, right? Specifically, when it came to these things right here, we
Yeah.
have what we call our unusual activity report, right? And that is going to detect any patterns of non-human behavior, right? Because as we all know, human behavior is erratic. It doesn't have a pattern. I pick up my mouse, I might use it for a little bit. I go into a spreadsheet, I type for a bit, then I stop, then I go on a conference call, whatever it might be. It's up and down, right? These things, all of the software and hardware, they are leaving crumbs of evidence everywhere because they either have repetitive patterns, high activity, all of these types of things that we can detect and we showcase in the UAO report, right? So the end result for them was, complete visibility where they were blind, right, across the board. And it really, the time to value from that POV was really, really short. We're talking about within a week, they could identify those people who were, not doing what they were paid to be doing. Okay.
Yeah. Even now, I think if I remembering this particular customer, they went from, like we were saying, 4 to 5 hours a day on average of unaccounted hours. And now it's like, even though their use case here shows 1 to 2, it's even lower than that, what I believe. And so it's been really interesting to continue to work with that company to show the increased productivity, the increased efficiency across the board. And, there were situations where they had to, remove some repeat offenders from the team, but then they didn't lose any productivity because they weren't doing work in the first place. Right. So there's a give and take with all this stuff. As you see the data, now you need to do something with the data. So it's like you see something, do something type of thing. And so we got a question that came in from Joel. When our KPIs quickly show that productivity is down and then start investigating by agent. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And exactly what Damien was just saying, that's what this company was trying to do before. They were manually going in one at a time, trying to identify what was causing the drop in KPIs. And that's where the lack of visibility comes from. Is it's very challenging to see what's going on unless you have that level of visibility. It's just like on a sales team, when you've got a really well built out CRM, you can see how many phone calls, how many interactions, call outcomes. You can see how long they were on the phone, if they were doing a demo, how long they were on a webinar. But for back office functionality, people who aren't on the phones, who are handling ticket times and answering support requests, or engineering teams, that doesn't really exist. And so you have to kind of implement something that tracks that behavior so you can really see where those levers and mechanisms are inside of the business when they're not on calls where you can track it. So KPIs are a way to know where to start looking, but where companies that we work with get lost is, where do they get the information to know what's causing the dip?
Yeah.
Right.
Agreed.
So, and we'll get into another example here in just a second on how that acts, how we kind of roll into that. So great question, Joel. I appreciate that. So poll question number 3, how are you addressing the issue with compliance in your organization? Right? Like, hearing some of these situations and the examples, are you doing regular monitoring and audits? Do you have established clear policies that the team abides by? Are you using compliance software and tools? Or are you just kind of not doing anything? You're just letting the team operate, right? So how are you addressing non-compliance in your organization? Now, seeing the examples that we went through in the situations, thinking about that, are you doing regular one-on-ones? Do you have tools in place to where you can spot check, monitor, to where you can create these efficiencies? Or you just kind of honor system? Or if you're an engineering team, are you just doing sprint reviews every 2 weeks to monitor the delivery of that stuff, right? So there's now looking at the different ways you can be non-compliant. How are you monitoring that?
Yeah. Great question.
Well, give you guys a couple seconds of silence to think about that, because it's a heavy question now that you see that. Should have like elevator music or something playing. Or the what's the old school Jeopardy music?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Perfect.
Regular monitoring seems to be the result. Yeah.
That's and my follow-up question to that, and my follow-up question to that one is, and you can put it in the chat, is, what are you doing in those those regular monitoring conversations? Is it a spreadsheet? Is it, is it the one-on-ones? Like, how are you doing the regular monitoring, right? Is it a manual thing? Is it, right? Like, there's always a layer deeper when you do that, even with a tool to monitor the behavior. It's like, you see something, do something, right? Like, how are you taking action on that? So it's good.
Yeah.
Good. At least you're doing something. That's the important piece.
Yeah, sure.
So getting right into it, one of our other kind of the other ends of the spectrum, right? So it's an insurance company. Now we go into an advertising firm. So big advertising firm, lots of remote employees, both in the States and overseas. Kind of an interesting challenge that they faced going through this that kind of tackles a couple different areas. And so I'd love, what was the situation with this company, Damien?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Duan. Yeah, so advertising company headquartered in the US, but had a global reach, right? So kind of like not even satellite offices, but just had people everywhere, kind of dotted everywhere. So again, from a compliance standpoint, a real challenge for them. 700 employees that they had, kind of approximately.
Wow.
And when we spoke to them initially, and we kind of part of that initial conversation at Discovery was the likes of cheating tools, right? Things like mouse jigglers and software and things like that, like lazy work. They had really very little idea about these cheating tools and that they even existed, right? So again, what we did, as we always like to do with Time Doctor, because we know that when we run a proof of value, when we run a trial on Time Doctor, and we deploy it through either like a subset of your business or even an entire full blown proof of value, it's going to be a lot more eye opening than it would be for us to just show you our own data, right?
Yeah.
When you see it actually live coming through. So this is what we did. We sat down with them and we really set down the marker. And they were frankly shocked to see the sheer volume of people showing up within our unusual activity report. The amount of
Yeah.
people with suspicious activity, 150, over 150 users that were showing up in our unusual activity report. So this was not just a few bad apples. This was like
Yeah.
endemic in the company. You know what I mean? This is like nearly like a cultural shift that they have to try and fix, right?
Yeah.
But again, as we've already mentioned, this presents a huge data protection compliance breach, right, or risk, because this particular client, they handled PII, right? So think of
Wow.
like PCI DSS, think of GDPR, because GDPR is like if you do business within the European Union, you have to abide by GDPR as well. You don't need to be based there.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had so on that note, we had a customer of ours based out in the Philippines
Hmm.
that we were just actually on site at their location doing the normal account review. And so they didn't have access. They didn't use the UAR functionality, right? They just
Yeah.
had that top used unproductive websites and applications that we're seeing right there, those red lines for everyone watching. That's all they had. And the our main point of contact in the account was a huge proponent, loved the tool. But then when we started really digging into them, one of the top used sites was a mouse clicker site that they weren't they weren't picking that up. They weren't paying attention to it. So they weren't going in until, we were showing them like, hey, like this is not a good thing. Like it's showing up as unproductive, but you got to double click into it. And so then we showed them like here to properly identify that. Here's how to get notifications. Here's how to show up on a dashboard by using UAR AI that we have that really bring that stuff to the forefront. And it completely changed the visibility of the organization. Like it was, I don't want to say amazing to see, the reaction to that, but it really gave them insights on like how exposed they were because they're a very similar company
Yeah.
where it wasn't just a desktop physical thing. It was a web login that these employees were logging into with their credentials that our system was picking up that they were using. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's like, sure, you can make the argument that a physical device isn't going to cause any technical or data breach and all that stuff. But like when our web and app usage function, like when you pick that up from someone's computer, that's in the system. Like
Yeah.
there's no excuse on getting around a physical device that you can plug into the wall and just moves your mouse. But like that's the crazy part is like some of the stuff that you don't realize is happening because work hours are getting submitted, work is getting done, but then you don't really know, kind of like the question before with Joel of the KPIs are starting to go down, but you can't identify why. That doesn't come
Yeah.
up in one-on-ones, but until you start double clicking into what's going on in a day-to-day, you really don't understand. And so
Yeah.
it's really hard to ask the question like, are you compliant? And if you don't know, you don't know. But that's the issue is like it's the devil that you know versus the one you don't know. The one you don't know is always worse. And so in this situation, it was like they couldn't help to be upset with their team. So we had to take it back to a coaching situation. Like, here's how to approach the conversation. But you never know what you're going to see when you kind of pull back that curtain.
Yeah.
And you have to be ready to have that conversation once you start seeing this data. It's pretty alarming in some cases. And I remember this one specifically where
Yeah.
we completely had to help them pivot their culture, completely had to help them rewrite their employee handbooks. They had to implement
Yeah.
different policies. Like, it was pretty wild and eye opening for them. And so they're much better off now. But it's really crazy to see some of the stuff that the team is doing or not doing.
Well, no, absolutely. Like what's crucial about all of this data and information is really working with businesses on a rollout plan, right? Like
Yeah.
what to do with the data and information. If I'm a manager and if I see one of my team is showing up in our unusual activity report,
Yeah.
like what do I do? Okay. So
Yeah.
the beauty of Time Doctor is that we're telling a story, but we're telling it from different sides. It's different
Mhm.
facets. Each report that we have will just bolster that evidence. For example, in our unusual activity report, we will back up what we're saying with it when a user shows up in that report with screencasts, for example, right? So that you can actually see the physical evidence of what's on their screen whilst their unusual activity is going on. So
Yeah.
again, it's all about just building up that evidence base. And in this particular example, what we did was we worked with this company to figure out a rollout plan for
Yeah.
this amongst their managers, so they communicated in the right way to their team members. And what they saw was very quickly, even within a 2-week time frame, they saw a reduction of 50% of those users in the unusual activity report. They weren't showing up any longer because, look,
Yeah.
they knew the jig's up, the game's up. So it's like, we can't continue to do that. So
Yeah.
you're only going to see the floor rise from then on,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like just looking at the strategies to really help secure high level compliance. A lot of times, yes, we're a software company, but a lot of times it's not a specific piece of technology. It's
Yeah.
really how close are you able to have your team adhere to the compliance policies you have in place. It's simply, hey, Billy Bob, don't click the link that comes in via email from an unknown sent. Don't do that. But
Yeah.
like, if you do implement a piece of software to do that, you can then backtrack and see exactly what happened. And I quickly identify that phishing link,
Yeah.
that not fish phishing, but it's like that software phishing link, right? That comes in via virus and all that stuff. And so now with something like Time Doctor, you can go back and actually see what happened rather than trying to backtrack, which now a lot of modern malware eliminates that path, so you can't even go back inside of the code. So it's crazy what's out there. But like, when you have the regular training and education for your teams, you have a consistent level of communication on those policies so people know what they're held to. And then technology, right? So there's technology out there to fool the system, but there's better technology out there to pick that stuff up. So you got to have the ability to detect those things, and don't let compliance be a problem before it becomes a problem, right? And the culture that comes around that, everyone's business culture is different, but at the end of the day, it's how it's delivered, it's how it's rolled out, like you were talking about. And there has to be a culture of accountability inside of the organization for it to truly be adopted. And there's always edge cases, there's always different scenarios, but when you break it down, it's like thinking about the what if scenario. If your organization, if you're a BPO that serves banking industries or financial institutions, and if that one agent clicks that one link that one time, what happens, right?
Yeah.
If a team of your agents are sitting at a co-working environment, and one or two of them has the mouse jiggler in place or visiting the mouse clicker website, and they walk away from their workstation and their friend leans over and sees some information, right? There's like little ways to do that. So you don't want to try and afford the non-compliance piece, right? And so it's like the key takeaways here. It's like the right kind of automation for the workforce analytics piece is going to really help simplify and eliminate a lot of that risk. Not 100% of it, because it'll always be there, but you'll reduce the risk entirely. And then just making sure you've got the secure compliance in place for the policies. And then the key thing to remember here is that actually the scary thing is it's likely happening. You just don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And like you said, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? And that's the case with a lot of the customers we've worked with. It's like once they see it, they can't unsee it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, agreed. And just even a little, like in terms of financial cost, that top one there, cost of non-compliance, from a regulation that's so close to home for me, GDPR, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about for fines for infringements ranging from anywhere from 10 to 20 million euro to 2 to 4% of annual turnover, whichever is higher, right? So these are not small sums of money. These are big fines and infringements, and you know that they are only going to increase as time goes on, because data and data protection has become just the buzzword. It's it's in everything that we do. Everything that we transfer is transferring data to to everyone else, and it's out in the ether. And we need to make sure it's protected, right? And that's why regulations like GDPR, etc., are crucially important.
Yeah, it's and speaking of hitting close to home, I'm in California, right?
Yeah.
And California labor laws, break time laws, like all that stuff are crazy strict here. And a lot of companies just choose to not track it. They'll just take a time card or they'll pay for 8 hours in a day and call it good. And a lot of times what'll happen is they'll start requiring break time, clock in and out. They'll want to make sure the employees take the minimum amount of breaks. But they have a very, very hard time verifying that they actually took a break, right?
Yeah.
They clock in for a break and they keep working.
Yeah.
And then they forget to clock back in, and then they have to go and correct their time, but then they're working the whole time. But if you were to get audited from the one of the labor boards here in California, and they sat in your office and saw that happen, you'd get a fine per offense per employee. And I've seen those go up to $10,000. And so if you've got an office of 20 or 30 people that maybe they're working in a WeWork, or maybe they're working in a high rise in San Francisco, and they see that happening, they're just going to go through and count the individuals. I've seen it happen first time, and it's crazy. Then you can't let those employees go, because then their whistleblower. It's crazy. So if you don't have the method in place to be able not only give people the ability to take that time, but then monitor if they're actually taking the time, it's like you're exposing yourself to even more risk by giving them the option to continue working, right? And so there's no way to win unless you have the right things in place. And it gets annoying the bigger the business you are and the more remote you are. But it's like you have to take the necessary precautions to ensure that you remain successful and you grow. Because in today's day and age, like the more you grow, the more at risk you become, unless you take these steps to prevent the risk from becoming a problem, right? Like it's all over the place. It just comes in its different various forms.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But yeah, all right. So you can hear enough from us if you'd like. There's some. I know we've had some questions come in. Joel, appreciate that. If we'll find a way to get you something for asking that question, love the engagement. So if anyone else has any other questions coming in, please bring them up. Or I think Dennis, there's another one that popped up. You can throw up on the screen and we can answer. Oh, perfect, Joel. Thanks for popping in again. Damien, I'll let you take this one.
Well, cool. I appreciate it, Joel. So what are some best practices for adoption? Has potential positive and not so positive reactions from the workers? Yeah, like that is a great question. And look, all open, frank and honest, you will get, positive and negative reactions to this. This is where the rollout becomes absolutely crucial. How you communicate something like Time Doctor to your employees is absolutely crucial to its success, right? Because as we talked about already, you can't put the genie in the bottle, right? But I can guarantee you the people who will be most vocal will be the people who will more than likely be gaming the system. The people who will be delighted when this gets introduced are the people who are being overworked. The people that are shouldering the burden for everyone else on the team, they will be delighted with something like this, because it means accountability. It means equitable treatment across the entire team, so that everyone's pulling in the same direction. And if I'm there doing 12-hour days, and I know that Frank over there is doing only 4, I know that, hopefully I'll have some nice work-life balance coming my way. So
yeah. There's a lot of self-policing that happens. And that's the kind of the knock-on effect when you deploy it correctly. Like if you just roll this thing out and don't really tell people what it's for, you're only going to get negative reaction from the team. That's where you're going to get pushback. Big brother's going to get thrown around. But when you go through an actual process to understand what problems you're trying to solve, what are the KPIs you're trying to impact, and how you and your management team are going to use it to help rather than just monitor, right? There's always a few bad apples, right? But one thing is constantly true. The A players in the organization want the accountability, because then it shows that they're worth more than what you're paying them, right? So there's that effect too, where it's like you can have your rock stars bringing it like, look what I can do, right? But that's okay. You want more of those, and you want that level of accountability and exposure for the organization. You're always going to have people that think you don't trust them, and you're monitoring them. And the number one thing I always tell people, I'm like, look, it's not about how or when you work. Go work from the top of a mountain, from the beach, whatever. That doesn't impact flexibility for a remote world. It's about what you're doing while you're getting paid to work. Work 2 hours here, take 4 hours off, work 3 hours over there, do your thing. Get your work in while you're getting paid. In between that time, who cares?
Yeah.
And that's what's missing in a lot of these situations.
This is what it comes down to with Time Doctor, right? It is the quality of the work, the quality of your output. Really, that's exactly what we're trying to get to. That's the crux of the issue here. It's like, what you're doing of a day, is it productive? Is it going towards what you're meant to be doing? Or are you sitting there watching Netflix for 6 hours a day? You know what I mean? Like, I know that's an extreme case, but we see it every single day.
Yeah.
Like when we roll these things out, people sitting there day trading. People, you know,
it's extreme because it's like we can't make this stuff up. Like, it'd be great if we did, but the day trading thing, I remember you and I were in that conversation a couple weeks ago, and it was baffling to the company, but it's there, and I think what ends up happening too is people, they don't think they're doing anything wrong because they're working from home. So 99 times out of 10, people aren't intentionally malicious with their activity. And this can be seen that way. Yeah. When companies roll something out like that, if you don't communicate it properly, if you don't train your managers on how to have the conversation, then people take it that way. They take it as you're thinking they're being malicious with their time, but they just don't realize what they're doing and what they're not doing because there's no attention being paid to it. Because I think one of the impacts in remote work is we've actually become more distracted from when we were in the office. Like, sure, we had water cooler talk and people walking up, but now we've got pings, notifications coming from a direction. So we have shorter periods of focus time. I call it time in focus, right? So you have less time in focus because you got all these distractions. And so they don't realize they're in focus for 7 minutes, and then they spend 15 minutes at this notification, and then they get a ping from day trading, and then they got this thing from Facebook, and then 30 minutes later, they're like, oh crap, I've been working on this one ticket for 45 minutes because I got pulled in this direction. And so I think remote work has a bigger opportunity to be more focused and more effective when we have the necessary functionality in place to track and monitor it, rather than just forcing everyone back in the office, because you're not technically solving the problem. You're just introducing a potentially bigger one. Right. Yeah. So when you have these things in place, the key aspect is how you roll it out. If you just plug it in and hope for the best, you're going to have a lot of pushback. So you got to set it up for success.
And I know that's a real long-winded answer to your question. We spent a good 5 or 10 minutes on it, but it's a great question.
Yeah.
In order to allay your concerns, like, we really work with you in Time Doctor to help you with that rollout, right? We hold your hand through that process because likely you've never done it before, right? Yeah. Likely your managers have never had to utilize this type of data before. Yeah. So everyone's going to have questions. It's totally natural. So this is exactly what we do. We sit down and we really work on a plan, a specific rollout plan for you, one that's going to have the most impact and have the least pushback. That's really what we're trying to do.
We got a question in the chat, but I think what we could do is we can follow up with that one because we're running out of time. It was Van said, when will the activity summary report have dates in the low activity screencast section? It helped tremendously decreasing. So clearly, Van, you're a user and a customer, or you're thinking about being a user or a customer. So one, if we've got your email address, we'll send out the answer to that question because there's a short and long version of that one, but I want to make sure you get an answer to that one. So the activity summary report is actually some of the things that we've showed some screenshots on here. So it shows what's happening during the day. To get to some of the data that we've been talking about, you double click into that and it shows you the rest of the information, but we got to wrap up. But Van, I appreciate your question. If we got your email, we'll follow up with you with the answer. But if anyone needs or wants visibility on what's going on inside their business, or just want to see if what they're doing is covering all the bases, right? Schedule time with one of our team members. We'll do a quick consult with you. We'll walk you through what it's like and really get a sense of if it makes sense for you to put something like this in place, work with Time Doctor, work with our team. And if not, then no harm done. At least you got the visibility on it. So main thing, schedule a time. You can go to timedoctor.com, top right of the corner. It'll say, view a demo, book a demo, and have you put your information in, and we'll get you taken care of. But without further ado, I appreciate everyone's time. Thanks for joining us. Damien, any closing thoughts on that?
No, you've hit the nail on the head. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your day. I really appreciate it. I know everyone's busy, we've got things to do. So no, really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, definitely. There's a link to that page inside of the chat, so you can click on that. You don't have to worry about trying to type that in yourself. But yeah, thanks for taking the time out of the day. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Yep. Have a good day.